Here's the thing, folks. This is an awesome episode. We are very excited to bring you. We are brought here and have the amazing opportunity to be joined by a man who has served in volunteer roles for the Nova Scotia Hearing and Speech Foundation, Neptune Theatre Board, on the board for the Business Development Bank of Canada, on the committees for the Retail Council of Canada, the Canadian Bankers Association, and also on the Chief Marketing Executives Committee of the Conference Board of Canada. He holds an MBA from our beautiful university at St. Mary's here. Since his election in 2021, he has served as Shadow Minister for Innovation, Science and Industry, Vice Chair of the Standing Committee on Industry and Technology, and lastly, as a member of the Standing Committee of Fisheries and Oceans. We are joined by Rick Perkins and someone we affectionately call here on the show, Ricky Perk. Let's go. Ricky. How you doing, sir?
Good, I'm great. Some people call me Mr. Green Slush Fund, so.
Oh, yeah, that would be you. Yeah, that's going on. How has that been going so far?
It's a huge monster scandal, and hopefully after the next election, we'll get in power and we'll turn over all the unedited documents to the RCMP.
We'd love to see that.
A proper police investigation can be done into what is clear corruption in that organization of $1 billion of taxpayer money.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were kind of talking before the recording, talking about how you reach over the aisle, you talk to other MPs. What's it like for you working in this situation where you're seeing such corruption from the other side, yet you also call some of them friends? And what's that relationship like when you're trying to deal with this?
Well, it's a pretty small work environment like everyone else. There's only 338 of you, and when you work in a certain area like I do in industry, on the industry committee and fisheries committee, you spend a lot of time with the MPs from the other parties. So especially in a minority parliament, if you want to get stuff done, you got to find a way to work with the other folks. So by way of example, last year when there was a bill in to change the Investment Canada Act, I actually worked with the NDP and Bloc members on our committee to amend that act and get some stronger provisions put in it that would require the government to provide greater scrutiny and investments in Canada from places like China. And so to do that, you got to find a way to work with folks, both officially in front of the camera, but off the camera too, because everyone's still there trying to do their best, even if you disagree with them.
Has anyone ever thrown punches off camera? That's the real question.
Off camera?
Yeah.
No, I did have in the industry committee, it was Public Accounts Committee on the Green Slush Fund, Nathan Erskine-Smith tell me to fuck right off.
Oh, there you go.
On camera, because I said he was defending the theft of $400 million of taxpayer money in the Green Slush Fund.
Sure, he didn't appreciate that.
I said to him, I thought you had more integrity than that. For some reason, he was offended.
Yeah. He went on his podcast after and made sure to tell you again.
Exactly.
Wild. Yeah,
that's hilarious. No, but honestly, even just thinking about that and knowing kind of that relationship that you have with those folks, how did you get to that point? What changed your mind from going from a person who started businesses, working in all this industry, to go, I'm going to go work with these folks in here who may not have the integrity that I would hope for?
So the sort of political journey, because I've had a diverse business career, I'll call it career ADD. Out of undergrad, I went into politics, actually, as a staffer in the Mulroney government. And then when everybody in 93 told us to get another job and we lost the election, I ended up on Bay Street working for a couple different financial companies and having my own business. So, but always stayed involved as a volunteer throughout all that. And before I was elected in 2021, I had spent a couple of years doing a hostile takeover of a company in Alberta, headquartered in Alberta. They were the largest publicly traded company in North America that's retailed alcohol. So the biggest in Alberta, BC, Alaska, Kentucky, and New Jersey. So I did a hostile takeover then, went out to Alberta, was fixing that and seeing, I tell you, when you're in the retail business of booze, you see firsthand the impact in the economy, when the economy's up and the economy's down, because it's a discretionary purchase, right? And when I was there in 2017, 2018, we saw a lot of people in Alberta either unable to afford to buy beer anymore or had actually gone from, the heydays of the oil patch where they were buying, top of the line everything to buying the cheapest beer they could find and cutting back, right? And to the point where almost 40% of beer sales were economy value beers in Alberta. So I saw that, and it was being caused by the economic policies of the Trudeau government, the anti-pipeline bill, the anti-capital bill, as I call it, that has driven out all big capital investment out of Canada, and decided that I would give that up and try and do something about it. I grew up here. I was living here. My wife was still living here in the beautiful South Shore of Nova Scotia, and I was commuting back and forth every 2 months. Sure. And so I said, well, I'm going to run. And I ran in the 2019 election and against the Liberal MP at the day, Bernadette Jordan, and I got my butt handed to me. I lost by 7,000 votes.
Oh, gosh.
I thought maybe this wasn't the smartest idea in the world to leave what I was doing with great pay and a fun industry. And so I just kept at it. It was because of those Trudeau policies that I said, well, I got to stick at this thing, and basically campaigned for a couple of years up till 2021 and got myself elected, defeated her. She was a fisheries minister then in a riding that has 5,000 commercial fishermen.
Yeah, right.
And they were pretty pissed off at her. It's our most important industry in Nova Scotia. So we didn't exactly have a sweep going on for the Conservatives in 2021. So flipping over and defeating a Liberal minister was something. And then Aaron made me his fisheries critic, and then 2.5, almost 3 years ago now, when Pierre became leader, he asked me to be industry critic because of my business background.
Sure.
Right. No.
Well, sorry, I'm going to just jump in because there's something that kind of popped up that was interesting to me there. So you've been involved 2 elections at this point, going into a 3rd. So don't want to get you in trouble, but I'll ask the question anyways, is what has it been like what was the differences and changes between running under an Andrew Scheer-led Conservative Party versus an Aaron O'Toole versus a Pierre Poilievre?
You're right. All 3 are different. Under Andrew, we're up against the first re-election of a majority government pre-COVID in 2019 with a prime minister who had broken all his promises on the deficit and debt, but was still extremely popular. And in 2019, people didn't seem to care about deficits. They didn't seem to care about how much money the government spent. So it was tough trying to deliver that message, which Andrew was and our whole team was, trying to say, hey, folks, you really shouldn't elect these Trudeau guys because they're going to put us in a very difficult financial situation. It's already bad enough. So that message just didn't hit at the doors. In 2021, we're sort of still on the edge coming out of COVID.
Yeah.
So the people were now starting to focus more on their own economic situation. And so there was a shift away from sort of, I'd say, broader social policy issues, more into the economic issues in 2021. They weren't that comfortable with our Conservative platform there. They liked Aaron here. They didn't like him in the rest of the country. Yeah. They found him too middle of the road, and the further west of Nova Scotia you got.
Yeah,
that's true.
And so under Pierre, and Pierre's been an amazing shift. Political parties have to evolve, right? If they don't evolve, they die. I know that because I used to be a member of the PC Party of Canada, and we virtually died after the 93 campaign because we didn't evolve. And they have to evolve, and they have to reflect the issues of the day. And I think in opposition after Stephen Harper, the party struggled a bit for what was its economic vision going forward, its social vision, all those things. And Pierre has a very clear, transformative, in my view, vision that he's had that's been consistent with his philosophy about the role of government and what we have to do in Canada. So the single-minded focus of Pierre, I'll give you an example, question period, right?
Yeah.
Question period, we get 26 questions as the official opposition in the current parliament. Under Aaron, we would ask sometimes 26 questions on 26 different issues with 26 different MPs. Under Pierre, when Pierre came in, Pierre said, okay, folks, I know this has been important, but we're going to start talking about the cost of living, because all through the leadership, that's all people were saying to me, that they couldn't afford a house, they couldn't afford rent, they couldn't afford food, they couldn't afford the basics of life. And so we're going to focus solely on that. And that was a big shift. So we would ask all questions on cost of living. On every question period, pretty much since Pierre was elected, we've been focused on those issues, right? The things that matter most to folks, being able to put food on the table, have a decent job. And as we've developed that, that's a big change. And I think that's where you saw our party start to connect more you saw it in the polling numbers where we started to go up after months and months and months of pounding away. People started to recognize that we were, genuine about the issue of cost of living and that we had some solutions for it. And Pierre works like a demon, like nobody I've ever seen. Over 600 events last year alone, in addition to being in Parliament 9 months of the year. He traveled the country and did over 600 events. And that provided, the insight that he gets from talking to folks at these events and know what concerns people. And that's that single-minded focus. So where we would be all over the issues under Aaron, in the House, we've been focused on that one thing that matters most to people.
Oh, yeah, makes sense.
One of the things that I noticed, though, in your question periods in the House, which kind of ties into a little bit of your rebrand that's kind of happened. When you're in the House and you're answering, you start out with the same line. You're like, in 9 years of this Trudeau government.
And we'll be switching to 10 years.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
After 10 years.
After 10 years of this Liberal Trudeau government, we've experienced doubling of this and quadrupling of that. And it gets to the point where it's like, it almost sounds almost like if you've ever been to the Catholic Church, like that same kind of
Catholic.
Okay, there you go. There you go. So, you have your phrase and response. And one of the big criticisms that I hear from a lot of my Liberal friends are that it doesn't feel genuine. It feels forced. It feels, and I know the psychology behind it.
Yeah, the Liberals hate it.
The
Liberals hate it because it's effective. Do you remember the cereal commercials from when you were a kid?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember the jingles?
Yeah.
Do you remember the jingles from McDonald's? Mm-hmm. That stuff works.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
It's called marketing. And it's something the Liberals might want to try sometime. But marketing works, but it only works if it's genuine and based on the things that people care about and people want their, in this case, politicians talking about. And while the Liberals don't talk about the things that people care about, we've been effective in talking about them and expressing them in a way, in language that they understand. And over the last year, the Liberals in the House have actually laughed at us when we brought up the fentanyl crisis. Actually laughed. Everybody says, you were mean, you called them, you called their policies wacko. You called them wacko. We called them wacko after a year of saying we have a massive fentanyl problem in this country. And there are almost 50,000 people that have died since Trudeau's been elected from fentanyl. More than have died in World War II.
Yeah.
It's an incredible thing, really. And most families, even here in Nova Scotia, are touched by it. But when we bring it up, they'd actually laugh at it and not understand that those are issues that we were hearing at the door and that expressing them in a way, in language that people connect with actually works. That's marketing. I spent most of my business career in marketing.
Yeah. I hear you, but I'm also kind of like, I'm looking at the polls right now and I'm hearing on the ground what people are saying. And I do agree with you, it's effective because I find on the show sometimes we'll be talking and then natural language will come out and it will be your phrases that you guys are saying.
Doesn't know tax, build the homes,
exactly.
fix the budget and stop the crime.
But
everybody knows it, and those issues haven't gone away.
Is it effective though, in the sense like it's effective for memorization, but I'm looking at the polls right now, I'm concerned. I'm watching what's happening with this trajectory.
You know what Diefenbaker said about polls, right?
Oh no, he's bringing up the dogs. Bringing up the dogs.
But the reality is, look, I have a little bit of gray hair that isn't cut off, and I've been through this a lot. So polls go up and change quite a bit during leaderships. They're expected to. So in 1993, when Brian Mulroney resigned, I was a staffer then. In February 1993, sounds similar, right? February 2025, February 1993, the Conservative Party was at 19% in the polls, and the Prime Minister's popularity was actually 12%.
Wow.
Way worse than Trudeau's.
Yeah.
Way worse.
Right.
Not almost as bad on the party polling numbers, but way worse personally for Mulroney. Kim Campbell was elected leader in June, and in the summer we were at 40% in the polls. 40%.
Yeah.
And then on election day in October, we got 19%. So you normally get a bump, and this is a theoretical bump. Most of this bump isn't Mark Carney, by the way. It's people's relief that Trudeau's gone.
Yeah.
Right? Let's be clear about what this is about. People are happy Trudeau's gone. Yes, they are a bit worried obviously about Trump, but in all those same polling numbers, the number one issue still is cost of living. It's not Trump. In the Ontario election right now, all the polling that's going on has cost of living at 57% and Trump in the 20s. So the cost of living issue is still there, and in fact, it's made worse by Trump tariffs and the Trudeau response. Because the Trump tariffs are ultimately, for us, are about cost of living issues.
Yeah.
They will put the price of everything up even more.
Exactly. And it was funny because even when you mentioned Todd Battis earlier, when Todd Battis had had Mark Carney on there, and he's like, but don't you think that if you remove the consumer carbon tax and just leave it on the industry, that they'll just pass it on to the consumer anyway? He goes, no, you just don't understand it. We're like, what?
well, you guys have your own business here. I wrote business plans for 20 years for big, medium-sized companies, strategic companies, all costs, corporate taxes, any kind of tax is just passed on as a cost of business. You still have to make the return for your shareholders. So whether that's a private shareholder, your family business, or whether it's a public company. So this is the incredible thing. This guy worries me that he was actually the governor of the Bank of Canada and actually thinks that businesses don't pass taxes on to customers, or that he says that when's the last time, Todd Battis, that you bought steel, or that you used steel, while he looked into a TV camera made out of steel, in a building made out of steel, in a car that drove over a steel bridge in a steel car. But apparently he's not aware of that. Maybe it's because his servants go into his kitchen and get his champagne out of his steel fridge for him, and he isn't aware that he has a steel fridge. So, but this is the same fellow who said to the media when asked why he should become prime minister without ever having run for elected office, well, I always go into the top job. I mean, bow down and lick my boots. Like, I didn't work at the Bank of Canada, but they needed me. I didn't work at the Bank of England, but they needed me. And now the Liberal Party needs me. Like, why would I lower myself to actually become a candidate in a riding, knock on doors, actually convince people in a community to vote for me? That's beneath me, right? So, like, this is the attitude. He's a globalist. He's a self-admitted globalist last week. He believes that elites and globalists should rule the country and that that's what's needed now. I don't think there's many people out there that think that we need a globalist elite banker who made a fortune on Wall Street, but is actually more left-wing than Justin Trudeau and is a climate zealot, an extreme zealot. Stephen Guilbeault isn't supporting Mark Carney because he thinks Mark Carney is going to build pipelines. Like, this is crazy that these guys, 2 weeks before an election, all of a sudden said, oh, after 10 years of killing pipelines, maybe we should build some. I don't know. Maybe we should not do the taxes we were planning on, except his carbon tax is a carbon tax on business. There already is one on business. And he's obviously just planning to increase it. And those are massive costs for our businesses at a time that we can't afford it, where we have this international uncertainty caused by the new economic philosophy of the President of the United States.
Yeah, well, they believe that they can tax themselves into prosperity is what I've come to realize.
Well, then we'd be the most prosperous nation on earth.
You would think. We should be. In essence, we have the resources, we have the talent, we have the people. We should be the most prosperous.
So the Liberals in the 70s thought that the way you could get out of the economic trouble of the 70s was to spend, and to put massive government intervention. And that failed. And that's what resulted in the new thinking of the day in the late 70s by Reagan, Thatcher, Mulroney, which is that you need lower interest rates, lower government spending, less spending, balanced budgets, lower taxes. And that was a new solution to what happened in the 70s.
The new public management, I think that was what they called
it. And it worked. Part of that got added into this idea of free trade, which Mulroney pushed and which the world adopted through that and through GATT and creating the World Trade Organization. But those solutions for the 80s aren't working for 2025 anymore, right? And that's essentially what you're seeing. Pierre has been talking about this for 3 years, that the Canadian promise is gone. The promise that you could come here, get a good job, no matter what your education was, provide for your family, own a home, your kids would be better off in the future. That's the Canadian dream. And that existed but for a long time, but doesn't exist now, and certainly has been diminished in the last decade. And and that is by specific government policies that have left entire swaths of our population behind who can't afford a house anymore or can't even afford to rent a house and are surfing on a couch at a friend's house or at a brother or sister's house. That's a country that's broken. So you mentioned that we've shifted. We haven't shifted there. Yeah, we're putting Canada first, but Canada first means economic policies that allow you to own a house, that allow you to think that your kids have a brighter future, that allow you to live in a safe neighborhood, which we don't have. Crime has more than doubled. That allow you, in the last 10 years, that allow you to make sure that your kids aren't exposed to things like fentanyl, that have economic opportunity for everybody to provide for their family, the things that are gone. Those things haven't changed. And putting Canada first in dealing with the tariffs, yes, we have to deal with the tariffs, but we have to also recognize that we have to have economic policies and social policies that drive forward an agenda that makes this a prosperous country again, and it's not. We make 40% less per person in this country than the United States does. And in 2015, when Justin Trudeau took over, we made the same amount of money essentially and had, over the decades, made essentially per capita the same amount of money individually. And now we make 40% less. That hasn't happened by accident. That's happened by destructive liberal policies that Mark Carney wants to continue.
For sure. And actually, just a genuine question, we're bringing up the fentanyl situation, is, the fentanyl czar was named just about a week or so ago, and people were, critical of it, including myself, because I just didn't feel like we got anybody real involved there. From your perspective, curious, who do you think should be fentanyl czar?
I don't know necessarily who it should be, but we've been talking for 2 years in the House about strengthening the border, about reallocating the money from the phony gun buyback, the billions of dollars, the $6 to $7 billion on that phony. First of all, you can't buy something back you didn't own, so it's really a gun theft of the government taking people's property. And the $6-7 billion that's estimated that it will cost, we've been saying, it's got to be put into border security for immigration, for drugs, for the illegal firearms, to provide for safer communities. Look, when the U.S. intelligence authorities tip off the RCMP in BC that there's a super lab that's got 96 million fentanyl pills in it, it wasn't from Canadian intelligence, it came from U.S. intelligence. It had it on premises. Just imagine how much of that had gone on into the U.S. before that. 96 million fentanyl pills would kill Canadians, all Canadians, over several times. That's how dangerous and powerful it is. That wasn't being produced to be consumed in Canada or British Columbia or Vancouver. It's impossible. It was being created to go across the border into the United States. And we have a weak border where the precursors for those drugs come in from China through our weak border. Yesterday, when I was in Ottawa, I met with the longshoremen unions for all the BC coast. Pierre was there, myself, and Kyle Seaback, our labor critic. And they were telling us, not one container goes out of this country that's checked. They're not checked. They moved to automation, taking pictures of the container. They don't even check to see if the seals are in. And they said, look, we pick up containers. It says empty. We know they're not empty when we pick them up, but we're not allowed to touch them because the container moves differently. It's heavier. And by the way, the machine we're using has a scale. So we know that this container weighs more than it should if it's empty. And this is the kind of porous border we have that's allowed the illegal immigration, the illegal guns, and the illegal drugs into this country. And for 2 years, we've been saying, tighten it up, stop wasting money on phony gun buybacks and use that money to strengthen the border. Now, all of a sudden, the Liberals are saying, oh, maybe we should do something about the border because Donald Trump wants us to do something about the border. Well, but Canadians have been asking them for years to do something about the border and they haven't been listening. So why do you believe them going forward that it isn't just a lot of fake liberal flip-flopping?
Right. And what I think is most frustrating too is because it's not just drugs going across the border. It's, like you said, it's the drugs, it's the weapons, it's all the cars that they're stealing from all across Canada. I mean, I have a good friend of mine. I had a good friend of mine. He just lost his car out of his apartment building parking lot. Gone. Went to go to work We both work at the health authority. Couldn't go to work because car was just gone.
Across the ocean now.
Yeah, it is. It's
Somewhere in Africa.
somewhere in Africa.
100%.
And then the other part of it too is that I had the pleasure of actually sitting in on a lecture of a woman who was almost trafficked. And it's like these things like that are happening in our country. And it's like, as a father of a daughter, this is concerning. As a friend who had a car stolen, that's concerning. As a person who lost their cousin to drugs,
Right.
that's concerning. And it really makes me really irritated when you look at this government right now and they are feeding the media this line that, it's only 1% of drugs that are going across the border. And it's like, is it only because 1% is being caught?
That's the point.
So,
To me, it's an admission of failure saying
Yeah.
only 1%. You're actually making the case that you failed in stopping the drugs going into the United States because that 96 million pills didn't just suddenly appear. There was a production facility going on there. And in the case of the car thefts and that danger, what happened is that most of them were going out of the Montreal port. 0 containers would be scanned going out of the Montreal port. Now they're starting to scan them because of the emphasis that we put in the House of Commons under Pierre Poilievre's leadership to start scanning containers. But the Halifax port here doesn't scan containers. So the cars are now coming to the Halifax port and leaving because it's a bit like whack-a-mole. So, and we have we've had a lot of crime going on in Southwest Nova Scotia, in my riding and the community next to, all funded by organized crime, money from China, organized crime in the illegal fishery. I know everybody says, I just like to eat lobster or whatever. But we have a county, Clare County, where drug dealers are running the show, where people's houses are being shot up at 1 a.m. in the morning, where people are being airlifted, being assaulted in their own homes by these criminals who are all funneling the money to buy illegal fish, lobster, Elvers, to buy all of that with laundered money, and it gets exported mainly to Asia. And it's just money laundering, and there is human trafficking going on. There are crack labs. There are all kinds of things going on in southern Nova Scotia, and there's virtually no policing there, and that's why it's happening. So what is more fundamental for a government than to make sure their people are safe, right? And our government is failing. It's failing miserably. And no change in revolving door of seats at the top of whatever leftist is going to run the Liberal Party, elite, banker from Wall Street, is perhaps even more disconnected from reality of everyday people than a guy who grew up on a trust fund.
For sure. And I do have a question to follow up with that is, we've talked about the organized crime that's happening, the money laundering that's happening. We're seeing it in a variety of port communities and port cities around the country. What is the appetite in the current Conservative caucus for implementing and bringing in racketeering laws in this country to start taking down some of these criminal organizations?
Oh, I think we're in desperate need. We don't have racketeering laws in that way. We've got they have very strong racketeering laws in the United States. We don't have them here. Those laws need to be added, along with actually restoring the issue that you don't get to commit crimes for free. If you're a multiple offender time after time after time, especially a violent crime, you're not going to get bail. And I know the courts have said that that's unconstitutional, but we've said, that's the one area where we're going to override the courts with the notwithstanding clauses to make sure that people are safe and that we can provide proper sentencing for violent criminals and keep them in jail. There's one thing that's guaranteed is that when a criminal's in jail, they aren't going to commit a crime against you. Yeah. And so we need to find and use the tools the federal government has to do that. Stronger sentences. We've talked about if you're, Pierre has announced that basically if you're making and marketing fentanyl, you're essentially a murderer because that's the ultimate result of people's addiction to fentanyl. And it's doesn't take much to kill an individual. So you're going to be charged and have sentences like a murderer, and you're not going to be able to go out and get out and bail in the next 24 hours if you're doing that kind of crime. So, and racketeering is a big part of that because we've got these organized crime units. So you need to have stronger penalties and stronger tools for police to be able to investigate and pursue these.
Yeah, because that's one of the things that I've heard in conversations with police. And I will admit, at one point in time, I was just like, oh yeah, police are terrible. Like, we need to get rid of them. And I think that was probably after quite a few speeding tickets, maybe. But But yeah, so one of the conversations that actually, when you sit down and listen to somebody who is a police officer and who serves the public in that way, is really just the fact that they're demoralized. They're like, we will go out into a community, spend as much time. We have a very large historic Black community, as you know, in Nova Scotia. They will go into that community, work with that community, and then catch the person who is actively harming that community by indoctrinating young men or getting them to, or trafficking young women. They'll actually catch the person with the drugs on them and the firearms, everything. And then that person will come out on bail and be gone.
Right.
Nowhere to be found.
Right.
And they said, we just watch it happen over and over again to the point where we're just like, why do we even bother? So,
well, especially when you're putting your life on the line when you're doing those kinds of things. And we've seen this with, again, with the illegal fishery that's been in the news here where people are going across private land and spending months and months at midnight to 6 a.m. on somebody's land fishing these baby eels that are $5,000 a kilogram. And they're armed. In a lot of cases, these are armed on people on the property. When you call the police, they're like, well, it's a $500 maximum fine for trespassing, and we arrest them. They're out. It's not much of an offense. And we've got other things going on and limited resources. So that kind of crime continues, right? And they have limited resources. And so they have to prioritize, like everybody else does at a business, where you're going to spend your time. So if they've got calls at night for assaults and that kind of thing, they're not coming to a potential trespassing thing where somebody is armed. So we've got to have the tools for the police, but they also get dispirited. We've had issues where they're like, these guys get out on bail. Why am I actually going to go risk my life?
exactly.
Other than my desire to keep my community safe and to keep people safe. But I think we get very complacent about that.
Yeah, and you said you mentioned using the notwithstanding clause because of the charter obviously being used and weaponized for the benefit of these criminals. But why is it coming down to the point where you have to use the notwithstanding clause? Why is it that you cannot work with the judiciary to actually create those laws and have them
Do some
go through?
carve-outs.
Is it just, sorry?
Like carve-outs for the charter type of thing, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, it's a great question. Don't ask me to explain how the Supreme Court actually makes some of its decisions. Right? Unlike the U.S. Supreme Court, in our system, they don't actually reverse decisions in subsequent cases. They can narrow it. So we have a Supreme Court ruling that said that serving sentences one after the other, if you're a multiple murderer and you get 3 life sentences, that you have to serve them concurrently, because serving one after the other is cruel and unusual punishment,
I
which
hate
is crazy.
that so much.
We don't want to get wild here.
Right? And
But
so,
killing people isn't cruel and unusual,
right? And basically saying I'm going to get the same sentence if I kill one person as I kill 3. So that whole idea, look, I'm a marketing and business guy. I'm not a lawyer, but the lawyers in our caucus, and we got some good ones like Larry Brock and Frank Caputo and these guys, they're saying this is just crazy. They were Crown prosecutors, and they feel frustrated having gone after Hell's Angels guys and all of this stuff and saying, how come we can't get a proper sentence for somebody who is a career criminal, violent criminal, who's done multiple murders, and still the court says, oh, well, we need to be kind to him somehow. We don't think, and I certainly don't think we need to be kind to multiple murderers.
I totally agree.
Yeah, and kind of going back to multiple murderers, we've seen a lot of rhetoric on the global scale right now with Trump, having issue with China lately, right? Don't worry, I'm not going to mention the 51st state yet, but but there is kind of the questions he's had serious issues with China, he's has issues with our Arctic and our border security, as we talked about. Do we have any appetite in our Conservative caucus, or in the Conservative caucus, about taking more of a targeted approach towards China and being a little more serious and tough versus what they're doing, especially how they're peddling drugs into our country and then working it down to the States?
Oh, look, 100%. My 2.5 years on the industry committee, every piece of legislation I've been targeting China. China is, there was, I call it the Clinton doctrine. They were brought into the World Trade Organization and Gambit on the belief during the Clinton era that we would, by opening them up to trade and business, that would open up their democratic processes. All it did was open up the fact that we're a bunch of fools in the West, and they took advantage of everything from our economics to our open borders to put forward their long-term agenda, which is to destabilize Western democracies and control them either through economics or other means. China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran are the four countries that are driving the instability in the world. They're the new alliance that is trying to undermine the West. Everything from paying $10 million for a $2 million lobster buying business in Nova Scotia to bringing in fentanyl precursors into our borders to dumping steel into Canada and tires that go into the U.S. They are, make no mistake what China, who is the leader of this, they do not like the West. They want us to go away. And so we have operated since World War II under a World War II alliance of Europe and North America. But I think, what our greatest harm right now is in North America is our Arctic. We have Russia, who has reopened almost 24 Soviet Union military bases in the north. We have China, who has armed polar class 1 icebreakers, more than we have in Canada, actually 4 times more than we have in Canada. They're not an Arctic nation. Those icebreakers are in our north. This is what we need to be worried about. We've got a Western hemispheric security challenge, and we've allowed it both economically and we've allowed it from a national security perspective by taking our north for granted. So Pierre has announced part 1 of our Arctic strategy, should we get in, which includes a base in Iqaluit, which would be able to service and where we would base the F-35 fighter aircraft, but also would be a fueling station and a base for our Navy. We have the new Arctic offshore patrol vessels that are built here in Halifax. We have new destroyers coming online. They need the north. There will be a second part to Pierre's and our announcement on the north. That's just the first part. We need to be a partner with the United States. We have NORAD, but we have the Northern Early Warning System, which is being redone. We have to be aware that the Arctic is our exposed area for entry into the United States for Canada and the United States enemies. And it's our responsibility to look after it as Canada because it's our country and our border. And China is and will continue to be a target. A lot of what you're seeing in the US and the security issues and what President Trump is doing is really around the issue of China's influence in the world. Their influence around the Panama Canal, their influence through our north, their influence of our economy. All of that has to be stopped because they are not our friends.
Pierre Poilievre's policies around like dollar for dollar so that we won't increase spending, that we won't run ourselves into financial ruin. And so I'm looking at this going, we want to build pipelines. He put forward a policy around, or an idea around bringing in big tech into the north so that we can take advantage of the cooling effect of our climate, which is incredible. But all these things, and then, beefing up the military, meeting our NATO commitments, all of this is going to be very expensive. So what do we do in a situation where we have a government that has run massive deficits for the past 10 years, run us into the hole financially, beyond the hole actually. And now we need to actually get money to build ourselves back up and to invest in these things that we need to unlock our critical resources, defend ourselves. What do you do in that scenario when, like I said, we've had runaway spending for so long? Where does that money come from?
Well, never has a government spent so much to get so little. Like we're talking about a government. Stephen Harper's last budget in 2015 was about $250 billion. The budget next year will be almost $600 billion. So a more than doubling of federal government spending in 10 years. I would ask everyone out there, is your life twice as good as it was 10 years ago when Trudeau took over and now doubled the budget? There is massive, massive government waste. We just had the report this week of almost $20 billion in consultants. That's on top of the growth of 111,000 more bureaucrats in the public service, growing from 250,000, adding another 111,000 bureaucrats under Trudeau. Incredibly wasteful things like the Canada Infrastructure Bank for $15 billion was actually not build infrastructures, now just turning themselves, as they're desperate in their dying days, into a bank lending opportunity, lending money to normal businesses that the banks would normally lend to. The There's the Canada Growth Fund. There's a whole series of these little funds that are 5 billion here, 5 billion there, 5 billion there. All of a sudden it adds up to real money that need to be repurposed. And all of that, we've seen this decline in prosperity. So we need to get the government, stop all that wasteful spending, reallocate some of it, look at the tax cuts we need to do. We have a lot of wasted tax loopholes as well. We need to look at those things and get the government more efficient and start our way towards producing a growing economy, to growing so that we can get back to equal productivity with the United States. We're 40% lower. If we do that, that growth alone will produce more revenue for the federal government ultimately if the economy grows. But the economy is not growing. The economy is at the same space it was in 2015. Yet we're spending twice as much, and that's why we've got this problem.
And we have 4 million more people. So
Right. Well, that's a whole other issue, right, on immigration.
Yeah.
But we've got this big problem. So growth will be part of it, absolutely. But smart decisions and stopping the stupid. Yeah. And there's a lot of stupid in Ottawa in the way they're spending money. So it begins with stopping the stupid in Ottawa and reallocating all that useless money to more useful things, like a properly funded defense, like proper support for our border and policing services to provide the basic things that the federal government should be doing.
And I mean, if you've watched a couple episodes, I know that you said
I'm a fan.
Yeah,
I'm thrilled to be here, guys. These guys are great.
But you may have seen that we spent hours going over those public accounts data, and God
love you for doing that.
And my background, I work for the health authority, so I'm not an accountant by any means. So we were very lucky that we had somebody who was an accountant to kind of
work through it with us,
guide us through it, very gently. And so you would know that we looked at that and we kind of came to the same conclusion as you, that there's just so much waste. And we're seeing south of the border, they're doing the whole Doge thing. It's getting, I think it's getting glowing reviews from everything that I'm seeing in my circles. I might live in a separate ecosystem
unless
than
you're on
others.
the left.
Yeah.
Left's not happy about it.
The left is hating it for some reason.
They want more bureaucracy.
I don't understand,
we're not any different. I mean, the fastest growing part of the last couple of years of our economy is the federal government. Most jobs are being created in government. You've got a problem in your economy when the growth is happening in government and not happening in the private sector.
Yeah.
Right? And so all of that is wasted stuff. Down here, we care about the fisheries. The fisheries department in 10 years has grown from a $2 billion budget to almost $5 billion. It has grown from 10,000 bureaucrats to 15,000. And that department they have 832 people working in HR. HR. Like, that's insanity.
Right.
It's insanity what they have. And that's not unique. The Parks Department has a subdivision that's dedicated to ensuring that when people are working, they're working with the correct language. The language being not French and English, but the words you're allowed to say in the woke society in the Parks Department and not say. That you can't say that Fortress Louisbourg here in Cape Breton belongs to us. They don't allow that in the Parks Department of Canada. And that's just a small example. That's permeated every government department, and it's caused an enormous waste.
Yeah, but one thing before I throw it over to Josh there, is just the thing that's worrying a lot of the Liberals, though, is because they have those jobs.
Yeah.
And so, you know what I mean? So when you look at that and you say, 800 people or whatever the number was that are in HR alone, like if we start cutting that, which we should, normally what would happen in a balanced society is that private industry would have jobs for those folks to actually walk into. But we've scared away private industry.
Yeah.
And
not
so,
we.
No,
True.
not us either.
No, not you.
But what I'm saying, we as a country, we've scared them away because of the policies that we've created and the immense amount of tax that we put on corporations. So what I'm wondering is, if we cut those jobs from those public sector positions, those people are now going to be unemployed because those jobs don't exist anywhere else. So what do we do to kind of bridge the gap between the wasteful spending where we have so much bloat and then getting to a place of prosperity where we actually have a thriving private sector?
So 17,000 people a year leave the federal government. They leave it. So they're employed there full-time and they leave it. They leave it because they retire. They leave it because they find another job. 17,000.
That's a lot of churn.
And so that is the focus that we're going to say. Basically, you know what, when somebody leaves a job, you restructure. So you can't rehire just to replace them. So it doesn't take long at $17,000 a year to get right-sized the public service without doing massive firings. I know
Yeah. But
public
that's what
servants
people are
and
afraid of.
departments are
though.
afraid that we're going to come in.
Yeah.
No, we're not going to come in and say, you know, all of you guys are totally gone. But there is a natural attrition that happens. Now there'll be some refocus, right? You're not, you know, I don't think you're going to see the elimination of government departments. Some of the stuff that we're seeing in the U.S. But there are functions in some of those departments that aren't necessary, and we will rebalance some of them over to things that contribute to our economic productivity rather than things that just create more bureaucracy for business. That's one of the crazy things. This the number one thing is one of the great privileges I have as industry critic is pretty much everything's an industry. So every type of business or association that comes to Ottawa wants to see me. You name the industry, I've seen and met with the CEOs of those industries and their associations. And their one constant thing, it doesn't matter what the industry is all the roadblocks that the federal government puts in the way of them actually doing anything. So you can put in place levels of approvals that are so onerous that you just say, well, I'm just not going to spend that capital here. And the result of that is that over the last couple of years, $500 billion of capital in Canada owned by Canadians has been invested in the United States. Donald Trump doesn't talk about the fact that we've sent $500 billion of Canadian capital to the United States. But that's not his fault.
Right.
That's the fault of the government of Canada that has put in acts like the Impact Assessment Act, Bill C-69 as we call it, which takes 10 to 15 years to get through that process to get a basic mine approved. We have 8 mine proposals in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland alone that have been going through that process for 8 years now. 8 years, and still nothing in sight. You can't develop an economy, and I'm surprised any company would allow and go through that process and tie up their capital that long, because you can go elsewhere in the world. Capital goes to where it can make money, and 10 to 15 years to get through an investment, an impact assessment, an environmental process, which isn't about the environment anymore, it's just about stopping projects. Taking 10 to 15 years to get through that has driven $500 billion into the United States from Canada. We have to bring that capital back by removing that bureaucracy from the federal rules, which will attract that capital back from the United States, which will see our businesses grow and see more jobs. And that's going to be, at least from my end, on the industry side, that's what I focus on, is how do we provide the policy tools and get the government out of the way so that companies, whether you're in what's called the tangible economy, you make stuff, or whether you're in the intangible economy, which is you are a tech company, we're going to do that. Another area is that the federal government oversees a number of industries, and all those industries are monopolies. They're government-created monopolies. When you're talking about the airline system, we have 2 ends: telecoms and cell phones. Banking, rail, freight on rail, it's all monopolies, and they're all federally government regulated. And what that means is we pay too much for everything. And your cell phone, sorry everybody out there who's a Rogers subscriber, Rogers subscribers pay the highest cell phone rates in the world. In the world.
Dude, they're number one.
Yeah, let's go. So congratulations, Bell subscribers, because you're number 2.
Oh, you're listening to something in life.
And if you're a Western Canadian, you might have TELUS, so you're number 3. It's the only time being number 3 is probably better than being number 1, because you're still the 3rd most expensive in the world, not Canada, in the world.
That's crazy.
And that is because we've allowed these mega companies to snow Canadians and Canadian governments about what it takes to build a network. Same with the banks are protected. We have Canadian companies in the fintech, the technology finance, that are, for example, on clearing your money, like between an institution and institution, like Interact. We have a company in Canada that is doing that. It's fintech. It's a technology company. They do 100 million transactions a year through Europe, but they're not allowed to be in Canada. And they're a Canadian company.
Wow.
Like, this is the craziness of our system, because we protect the 5 banks. They are not an oligopoly of 5 banks. They are a monopoly. that are protected, where you get no choice about anything, and they all charge the same credit rates, they all charge the same credit card rates, they all charge the same banking fee rates. And I worked for one of them for 5 years on Bay Street, so I have some familiarity with it. The bank CEOs didn't like it when I asked them the questions about their returns on certain products like credit cards, because I know what they are. And so we have to break those barriers down. That'll attract capital. Funny thing, competition creates innovation. It creates better prices and better value for consumers and a more productive economy. That's what we're going to be focused on from an industry perspective. How do we get more competition into this country, and how do we support the commercialization of Canadian innovation?
We saw in the US where TD Bank got slapped a $3 billion fine for the beautiful money laundering we saw them doing. And we saw it happen in Canada. Trudeau was asked, are you going to look into this? And he said, it's probably fine.
Right.
Didn't bother looking into it. Is that something we would look into, especially the fact that China is using our major banking institutions to hide themselves and also do business and essentially subvert our Canadian values?
Yeah, I mean, we've had lots of money laundering issues in Canada, some through the banks, some through the casinos. There's been a lot of stories about that over the years. China, it's another example where China uses our openness and financial institutions. That's why we need more competition. I think our regulators have been asleep on that. I mean, we do have money laundering laws, but
they come after me though.
Yeah,
they come after you,
the average Canadian getting slapped for like $500 worth of
But FinTrack, we have this organization called FinTrack that is supposed to see anything that's over $10,000 movement. They're supposed to be investigating it. And give you an example, when the mass murderer in Portapic took out $700,000 out of the bank, FinTrack never even looked at that transaction to find out what was going on. Jeez. So that's supposed to be one of the stop gaps for our money laundering system here in Canada, and it's weak. And the fact is, I asked TD Bank and the other banks if something like that could happen here in November in committee with TD there, and they said, well, no, and it's different and it's complicated, but you did it there. So where were your internal controls that are different in Canada that allowed this to happen in the US? Why would you allow it to happen in the US? There must be something wrong with the way the bank does its controls just globally, or that wouldn't have happened. If they had applied their great Canadian standards to the US, presumably they wouldn't have allowed that US money laundering to happen, but they did. So I don't have a lot of confidence that the system works that well. And everybody's looking for an in. We get that on the research side. The federal government spends a lot of money on, there's invention and innovation. Invention, a lot of research through what are called the grant. We have 3 granting councils. So they basically are the ones that provide money to universities to match and do research. And a lot of that money is matched by companies to leverage it. Sounds like a good thing, right? Mm-hmm. Take $100, get a private sector company to put in $100, you can do twice as much research. And usually in that case, the company that puts the money in owns whatever invention comes out of that. Yep. But in meeting with those granting councils, 90% of what they do is a foreign multinational and sometimes foreign governments. In some cases, University of Toronto and others, it's actually being matched by the army of the Communist Party of China. And they're in doing research in our universities in artificial intelligence and other areas. And so here's what we do in Canada. We spend somewhere between $16 to $20 billion a year on invention through this research. Most of it is matched by private companies, foreign multinationals, who then own any intellectual property that comes out of that. So Canadian taxpayer funds, let's be generous, funds Microsoft, or in this case here, Tesla at Dalhousie University in the battery lab. Yeah. They fund that information. Tesla, Microsoft own it. And then, of course, that great Canadian invention paid for by Canadian taxpayers, we buy back at retail and get zero productivity, zero commercialization. This is the stupidity of the stuff that needs to be fixed and why we're getting this productivity gap. Tesla owns all the EV battery technology that's being done here at Dalhousie University. It's matched by federal government money. All of Tesla's cars in Canada are made in China. 43,000 Teslas came into Canada last year made in China. The experimental batteries that they're having made at this battery lab, they actually make in China. So any great scientific breakthrough that we get at the Tesla battery lab at the Dalhousie University, China knows about. They're required under national security law. They're required to steal your technology. So we send over the requirements to make these experimental battery cells to China so they can manufacture them. They know all the specifics. So they can send us back these to Dalhousie, to Halifax, these experimental batteries. Meanwhile, China now has all the technologies, and they don't really care about our IP laws over here. So that's how they're leapfrogging ahead of all the Western nations, because they're doing this to every company. They're taking the technology that we invent and that we give them.
Yeah,
right.
Well, that's the part. It is, we're giving them, and I think it's not so much that, because I hear a lot, they're like, oh, the companies are just looking for the cheapest buck, to get it rolling. And I'm like, I just don't think we have the capacity in the country at this point in time. We don't have the sites, we don't have the development, we don't have the actual plants to produce things.
Right.
So
that's exactly right, because I asked the Dalhousie folks, I said, doesn't the National Research Council, another federal government, do they not have, they have what are called wet labs, so labs that make stuff, scientific stuff. I said, so with the Liberal government's focus on EV batteries, don't get me going on that $53 billion. But with that focus, you would think they get over $2 billion a year taxpayer money. Do you think that they would say, you know what, maybe you should be working with the universities that are doing EV battery science and making their experimental batteries for them so they don't have to go to China to get it made? But no, they're not doing that. So I'm not sure what they're doing spending that money on, but it isn't on the things that apparently were this government's priorities, like electronic vehicles. And don't get me wrong, some of those cars are amazing if you live in downtown, and they've got great torque and they're fun to drive, but they don't work in my riding, which takes 4 hours to drive from one end to the other. There's no charging stations on the South Shore. But the stupidity, or the major stupidity of the whole thing is,
Forgot to lock that elevator, my bad.
it's okay.
Yeah.
Those are some of our fans.
Yeah, that's what we wanted in.
The security kept them away.
Yeah, exactly. There it is. Yeah, but what you're saying about with China, the brain link that's happening, we saw that even down south of the border too with the new AI they launched for a fraction of the cost that OpenAI did their work for, and it was because they essentially stole what OpenAI had done and iterated on it. We're seeing that happening, and the reason why we're seeing this too is because we've chased away manufacturing out of Canada,
100%.
out of the United States, and we're forced to then use their manufacturing centers, then ship it all back here, and that's what's leading to this issue as well.
So if you listen to the Americans, what they say is basically in the U.S. we consume more than we make, and that's not good, because eventually you run out of money. So we need to make more things. And now the U.S. does make a lot of stuff, but a lot of those jobs in globalization have gone primarily to China and Vietnam. Low-cost producers is part of this. And so, part of the solution is to get those jobs back, to recognize what's happened. So we were big supporters, for example, of putting on the 100% tariffs on Chinese EV cars. Yeah. That was done in December. We were pushing that in the fall, that we should be doing that. Frankly, I'm not sure it's enough to keep the hugely subsidized BYD cars out of Canada. Yeah. But we've got to look at that, because not only are those cars basically not made the way we do in the sense of profit, they are dumped onto the market. They make 30 million cars a year in China, and we make about 12 million in North America. So they can't actually sell all those cars in China, so they dump them on markets at below cost to make them. But we're silly. We allow these things to happen. We had an incident a year and a half ago. This involves all of these issues all sort of coming together. It became aware that both the Canada Border Services Agency and the RCMP put tenders out for hardware communications equipment for parts of their communications network across Canada. And, good Canadian bidding, they low-cost bidder won. The low-cost bidder in the case of the CBSA, I think, won by $40,000 to put this hardware in across the country. And so it turns out that's a company in Canada that was awarded called Sinclair Technologies. They're actually owned by a Chinese state enterprise called Hytera. Now, they claim not to be state-owned enterprise, but they are owned by a Chinese municipal pension fund, which is the government in China. And so we allowed the RCMP and Canadian Border Service Agency allowed Chinese-made technology to be put into the communication system for our security services. But that's not the worst part.
Wait, there's more?
There's more.
Oh, baby, tell me, Rick. Tell me.
There's more, because this happened in the fall of 2022. But what happened in January of that year was that President Biden banned Hytera from doing business in the United States and charged them with 21 counts of espionage. And this is 9 months before the tender were awarded by the RCMP and Canada Border Services Agency to essentially a state-owned Chinese business. And when I had the RCMP and Canadian Border Services Agency in committee and asked them when they awarded the tender, did they not know that? They said, no, they didn't. And I said, well, you are our security agencies. You know, it took me about a minute and a half to put into something called Google who owns Sinclair Technologies, a company called Hytera, and then say, who is Hytera? And then all the info, including their financials, come up. And guess what? It always loses money. Wonder why it always loses money. If a company always loses money based in China and they're winning communication tenders with the RCMP and Canada Border Services Agency, do you think their motivation is making money?
Yeah.
No, it must be something else. That's how silly we've been under this government, that we have exposed Canadians to this kind of influence from foreign governments who do not have our best interests at heart.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm seeing too, right? That's a lot of the, shoot, I'm drawing a blank, you go.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's kind of a good segue, because like one of the things that I know that we've been arguing about as Canadians is really the foreign interference documents. And I have this argument a lot with my Liberal friends, because they're like, oh, Pierre didn't get his clearance. I was like, of course he didn't get his clearance. I was like, why would he? I was like, then he would be legally like required to never speak of it again. I said, well, he's waiting until he gets into Parliament as the PM to then be able to speak on it. I was like, but if he signs this non-disclosure agreement, he can't.
Pierre had a top secret security clearance when when you're a minister of the Crown, you have to get a top secret security clearance. He had that. In 2015, we lost the election. That security clearance is good for another 5 years. So that expired. So when you become prime minister, you actually don't go through that security clearance, the one that Pierre actually had as a minister of the Crown to be a minister. The prime minister gets it automatically, no matter what their background is. So they don't actually go through all the things where they go to your friends, neighbors, cousins, ask you why your middle name is X and who do you associate with. I had that when I had a top secret security clearance. So Pierre had that already happen. So it's a real boondoggle, but you're right. The primary thing is that he doesn't need that to get the briefing they claim they want to give him. There's a security certificate they can give him that doesn't require a full security clearance that allows them to do that, to say, okay, here's what's going on. But they were unwilling to do that, obviously, for political reasons. And the worst on the political reasons, as far as I'm concerned, is when the prime minister said he had a list of names of people in the Conservative caucus before that inquiry. And then what did the inquiry say?
Nothing to see here.
There's nothing to see here. There is no names. There is no names.
Which, like, that confuses me as a Canadian, because I'm going, we've had Jagmeet Singh say that there was names. We had Trudeau say there was names. Elizabeth May got up there as she does and made no sense. And then you had this report come out and Justice Hogue saying, don't worry, nothing to see here.
Well, see, I can't explain that confusion. I can't explain Miss Elizabeth May. That's not possible. But I can explain the confusion. The confusion is that we have this secret parliamentary committee called NSICOP, and we have 2 members on it from our party. They are overseeing some of the security intelligence. but they don't get, even though they've got security clearances, the security agencies don't give them everything.
Right.
They're just not really authorized to be at the most senior levels of what the prime minister would get. And so the information that they were allowed to see indicated that there were, seemed to indicate that there were 11 parliamentarians, because there were some senators in there, I think, 11 parliamentarians that were wittingly or unwittingly subjected to foreign influence. And that's what they saw. That's what Elizabeth May, that's what Jagmeet Singh saw. That's the report that they said you should get your security clearance PR for. Well, it turns out that security clearance, that assumption of that committee didn't seem to be correct based on what Justice Hogue said, which said basically there's nothing to see here. There is no such thing. Justice Hogue got all the detailed information, much more further detail than the NSICOP committee got to make that judgment, apparently. But it's all a sort of red herring from liberals who are scratching at any sort of issue to try and change the channel, right? Liberals want to change the channel from what they've done to destroy our economy and get people onto other bright, shiny objects over here, creating fake stories around security clearances or throwing out conspiracy theories about this or that. I should actually, if Parliament came back, bring actually some tinfoil for some of the Liberals I sit on committee on, because they've gone off the deep end on some of this stuff. And the reality is that the problems that we see that they're trying to drive us from with all of these fake stories is the fact that people can't pay their mortgage or rent and can't afford food, and that there's 2 million people every month using food banks, where that we've got entire generations that don't believe they'll ever own a house, and obviously that creates resentment on the generations beforehand that said, what's wrong that you guys screwed things up so badly that I can't ever own a house, a pretty simple goal in life, right? Or even afford food, or that crime has doubled. They'd rather us not talk about those things. They'd rather us talk about some paranoia about security clearances or the latest bright, shiny object of what's happening in the United States. But most people are still trying to figure out how to put food on the table. Yeah. And that's why they don't want us talking about this. They want us talking about Trudeau's Team Canada, so that we're all in the tent and saying, Trudeau's doing everything right on this stuff going with the U.S. And we're no longer talking about the issues most Canadians care about. But that's not going to stop us. So the pivot, the change, the whatever, saying we're putting Canada first. Well, putting Canada first means we're going to axe your taxes. We're going to build homes so people have a place to live. We're going to make sure that the budget is balanced and expenditures are done reasonably. And we're going to make sure that the crime is stopped. And yes, we've been saying we're going to rebuild our defenses. We have to. It's our obligation to. Forget about what's going on in the United States. We have been talking about rebuilding our defense for Conservatives during the entire life of this government. We had a defense that was much more robust under the Harper government when we were fighting the war in Afghanistan. We were producing light armored vehicles. We were producing ammunition. We were producing all of these things to keep our troops in war. We're not producing that stuff anymore. The Canadian Armed Forces has 24 hours of bullets. It's kind of pathetic, really.
Defense,
right.
$5.4 billion in consultants last year.
Right, exactly.
That's crazy.
We sent our light armored vehicles to protect our troops off to Ukraine, which was the right thing to do, but it's now going to take till 2028 to replace them. That's ridiculous. Like, what kind of system do we have in Canada that we can't buy stuff for our military? It's crazy. I mentioned earlier, we talked about Arctic sovereignty. Yeah. These are called Polar Class 1 icebreakers. These are the modern icebreakers that can go through the Arctic North. We're designing in Canada. When we announced we were going to build, we have one icebreaker in Canada that can go through the North. It's very old. It's called the Louis St. Laurent. In 2007, when you guys were still in diapers probably, but in 2007, Stephen Harper announced we were going to build a Polar Class 1 icebreaker at a cost of $700 million. In 2015, Justin Trudeau gets in and says, no, we're going to change that to 2. As of about 3 months ago, they're still designing it.
Gee.
Wow.
They started designing it in 2007. It's 2025, and they still haven't done it. You know what the Parliamentary Budget Office says? That $700 million boat will now cost $4 billion.
No.
$4 billion. And every year that it's delayed in cutting steel will be another $260 million cost. So, and the head of the Coast Guard told me in committee, well, we think we're on time and on budget. Now, he said that, and then he said we were going to have the first one in 2030 now. He was confident. That was 2 years ago. And then last year in committee, in 2024, I said, so when's it due now? He said 2032. I said, I thought you said after from 2007 to 2030, that was on time and on budget. But apparently on time and on budget now means 2032. Like, this is nuts. It's just nuts that we can't get anything done in this country.
Yeah, well, because you brought it up, I want to press on a little bit. I'm interested. You just brought up how you said, we sent troops to Ukraine. That was the right thing to do. This has obviously been a very divisive issue amongst the conservative group as well. And so my question then is, we're going this whole Canada first way. Is sending troops to Ukraine Canada first at this point? Do you still support what has been done, or do you continue to support Ukraine moving forward?
Well, we don't have troops in Ukraine.
Right, sorry, I misspoke.
We have equipment in Ukraine, and we supply equipment. Look, Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran are trying to destabilize the West. Russia going into Ukraine is part of the plan between China and Russia. China is looking at that to see what to do with Taiwan. If Russia gets away with what they want, China will go into Taiwan, which makes most of the world's silicon chips, which means we can't produce anything anymore on anything. Even Mark Carney's steel fridge couldn't be produced without chips from Taiwan. And this is all connected, right? So when a democracy and Western democracies are threatened, if we don't recognize what's going on, what's happening is North Korea is sending 50,000 troops at a time to Russia to fight in Ukraine, and Russia is giving North Korea nuclear technology, right? This is what's going on. It's called the cranks. They call it in the security world: China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And they watch out if they start giving Iran nuclear technology and what happens in the Middle East. Iran has funded what's going on in Gaza and the Western Strip. That's all part of that structure. So to not understand that that's how they're starting to destabilize the West, and that you don't think that the now supersonic missiles that Russia has developed for Ukraine isn't about coming over our Arctic, because where we have no defenses and no military bases, and they have over 24 military bases. That global world isn't what's driving all of this stuff right now. And we need to look at our Western hemispheric security. Absolutely, that's what this is about.
Yeah.
But all of what's going on in there is part of our security issue.
Interesting. Yeah, because that has obviously been the criticism too, is people have seen the perspective of, this is all driven by the WEF. And trying to get, trying to push and
I don't think the WEF, who I hate, I don't think the WEF was telling Russia to invade Ukraine.
Right.
Yeah.
No, and I understand that, but it is interesting though that Russia doesn't move until Biden's in power, and now you have the weakening of the major superpower in the West. So that kind of, I do find it interesting how it lends to your perspective though of.
Well, you got this Democrat and liberal view, which was soft stuff and how they dealt with people. And I think Biden was happy just to keep funding it and keeping it at a neutral sort of thing because they didn't know how to deal with Putin, who is a thug, a dictator, and a murderer. And you got to recognize that he kills his political opponents, right?
Yeah.
He has a long history of killing his political opponents.
100%.
And here in Halifax in the fall at the Halifax Security Forum, I had dinner with one of those people who was an opposition leader in Russia, who only 3 months before was part of the prisoner exchange. He was in jail in Siberia, and before Putin put him in jail, he had tried to poison him. So, these are not nice people,
Yeah.
right? These are people who don't like us, who want to dominate us through economics and through military. And all of that is part of it. So, a bunch of rich guys going in their private jets to Davos, who really gives a crap what they say? Maybe Biden does, maybe the liberals do, but I don't care about them. And we never have really, from a conservative perspective, because what they come up with after making their billions and billions that they all make, and then hypocritically turning around and trying to tell everybody else how they should live their lives. And by the way, you shouldn't have a chance to make money now that we've made money.
Right.
And that whole agenda that they have. It's a terrible, horrible organization. And yes, Chrystia Freeland's part of it and part of their executive and shares their philosophy.
Now. She scrubbed her profile now.
Oh yeah, she scrubbed her profile. She should learn about the Wayback Machine.
Yeah. So I kind of want to bring us right back again to kind of affordability just for a moment, because it's kind of been something that's been thinking in my mind, especially like thinking about, the promise of a future and, all of this, what does it mean to live in the West? What does it mean to have the promise of Canada? What does it mean to actually have something worth fighting for? And if people are so demoralized that they can't actually imagine a future where they have a home and a family and a good job, like they're not going to go to war for that.
Right.
And so,
good point.
like, I know that's a loaded statement, but bringing it even more down to the ground, saying things like, when you look at the mortgages that we're paying in this country, and the fact that if I go to the States, it's a fixed mortgage for 30 years. That doesn't change. Like, I don't have to renegotiate my mortgage every 5 years. Are there certain policies like that in the States that we can bring to Canada and say, let's make it more affordable in Canada for people to own homes? And, that's only one element. Like, there's multiple different policies that they have there that we could adopt and bring here.
Yeah, the U.S. mortgage market caused a global recession in 08, 09. They have a different structure. They allow your interest to be deducted.
Right. Exactly.
Which encourages people to buy bigger and bigger houses and take on more and more debt. They allow 100% plus. There were houses being financed at 120% of the value of the house and more in the U.S. We don't allow that for good reason, because real estate doesn't always go up. So that caused a crash. And then they have what are called, in a lot of states, non-recourse mortgages, which allow you, if you're underwater, let's say you bought a house for $500,000, and this happened in the U.S. in the global recession, and it's now worth $300,000, and the bank wants some of its money because the bank is overexposed. You can just send your keys back, and they can't come after you for the house loss in the U.S. on non-recourse mortgages. All of ours are recourse here in Canada, so it doesn't matter what the house is worth. If you default on your mortgage and the bank doesn't get what the house is worth, they still come after you for the money. Those things are there in some of our stability of our financial system, so some of it doesn't happen. But there are things in terms of the positive side of their financial system in terms of competition, because competition creates more creative product. It creates better pricing, doesn't create all this fixed pricing like we have today. And that's what we have to put into the financial service system using technology, fintechs as they're called. There's a fintech in Britain that in 5 years has gone from nowhere to being like the number 5 bank in Europe. And those are all through new technology and new ways to do banking. So that's what we have to bring in. But on your point about affordability, because that's really what you're talking about, making a choice, saying I've got $2 to spend, can I afford to spend $1 on defense and $1 on Ukraine, and then how about people who can't afford a mortgage or can't afford food here? Well, the best way to be able to do all of that is to make sure our economy is growing, which it hasn't done in 10 years, so that there's opportunity. But the other thing, because we haven't talked about it, is immigration. Over the last 20, 30, 40 years, we make about 220,000 new houses a year in Canada, roughly 200 to 220,000 new housing starts. And generally, our immigration level has sort of matched that, right? It rose to that level up to about 220 under Harper, but it didn't go above that, right? And so we didn't have this similar housing crisis because the immigration level and the temporary foreign workers and the education stuff was way more limited than it is today. And over 10 years, the Trudeau government took the lid off of things. You could work full-time while going to school. at a post-secondary level. You could, we had this massive growth in temporary foreign workers and massive growth in that. And at the same time, they moved immigration to 500,000 people. So all of a sudden now, legally, you're letting in twice as many people at 500,000 than you are building houses.
Yeah.
And then you let in 800,000 people in education over the years that are here on various things. Surprise, you have a housing crisis. Prices go up through the roof. We've got the Vancouver, Toronto more expensive than Manhattan to buy a house. So public policy needs to be driven so that our immigration matches what our system can handle in terms of jobs, in terms of housing, and in terms of healthcare. And it's far beyond that right now. And so one of the many tools, we've got the productivity tools that we've talked about that we have to fix, but we also have to fix that balance on immigration, right? And so that we get some growth from immigration, we get some skill shortages filled, but we're not even doing that well. There's 30 or 32,000 nurses here that we've allowed into Canada. We've brought them in as a skill shortage, but we don't allow them to practice. So you come here because we have a shortage. We actually have 30,000 nurses that we have a shortage of in Canada. And we've allowed 32,000 nurses to come in, qualified to immigrate to Canada because they're a nurse. And then when they get here, we don't allow them to be a nurse. Because they say, well, you don't qualify because we've got these provincial boards that accredit people and we don't like your credentials. Well, that's where we come in and say, well, enough of what the provinces are doing. We're going to do the Blue Seal program. If you write a test, you pass that test, you're credentialed. You can go to work as a nurse, you can go to work as a doctor. So it's fixing those things that help create more affordable housing, getting rid of the bureaucracy at municipalities that prevents housing from being built. Every municipality has a problem. We have it here in Halifax, we have it in Toronto, $70,000 for a building permit in Toronto.
Yeah.
It's insane.
But it's also the fact that when you look at the Canada Building Code, which is a federal. It went from this size to this size in the time that I've been alive.
That's true.
And every year it's like an exponential document. It's just getting thicker and thicker and thicker. And when I look at it and I go, because my parents built quite a few houses, and they're going, it's so much harder now and so much less profitable to build houses. Why would we do that? You know what I mean?
It's crazy, right? So, we do have the two building codes, right? The federal code
and the provincial code.
And then you have all your insane municipal bylaws on all of that stuff too. So you're right, the federal business building code is huge.
And everything's net zero now.
Right.
So
Sean Fraser, the then housing minister, was going, we're going to get heat pumps in every house. And it'll replace oil. And I actually stood up in the House of Commons saying, you actually don't know that the Canada Building Code doesn't allow you to have a heat pump as a primary source. You have to have a secondary heat source, which means that you can't take your oil out. So we've got all these layers. You got the Canada Building Code, you got the provincial one, we got some crazy conversion issues in the provincial one, and then you got bylaws. I've got a friend here who's a partner in the business that owns Dartmouth Crossing. They've been trying for 10 years with the Halifax Regional Municipality to build 4,000 housing units over there. 10 years. They've spent already municipally over $100,000 a unit, and they still don't have it approved. And we've got places here where you got a 21-story apartment building, a 21-story apartment building, and a lot to be developed here. A friend of mine went 5 years through the Halifax municipality, said, I just want to build a 21-story rental apartment building to match the other two 21-story buildings. And after 5 years, the municipality planners came back and said, no, you can build a 4-story building. 4-story. He said, why? I said, because. Well, so what's happening? He's not developing the land. And he won't develop the land because he doesn't need to. So that all of those things contribute to the housing shortage. So when we say the only influence we have over a municipality federally is the old gas tax. It has a new name, but every time you buy a liter of gas, there's a federal tax, and it goes to the federal government, sends to the municipalities. And it's given to the municipality by population. It's just the formula. It says,
which makes sense.
You get it by population. But there's nothing tied to it. So we're tying it to it. Said if you grow your housing by 15% or more in a year, you'll get more than you would have got by that population basis. If you don't, and you go less than 15% a year, you'll get less. Very simple formula. You guys figure out what you got to remove in the Halifax Regional Municipality or the Toronto Municipality or Calgary, what you have to remove as a municipality to meet that housing target. We're not going to tell you how to do it, but if you don't do it, you're going to get less money.
Money talks.
Yeah, sure does. Gets them moving. And we'll finish off here since we're running along. Yeah, but just it is a question that I know Reg and I have kind of bad back and forth, and very curious when it comes to an MP how you deal with it. Is you're representing your riding. This is how our system works here, right? But you're going back and forth from here to Ottawa, back and forth. I can imagine that's exhausting. I mean, I was giving Dennis a hard time, who's your EA. He calls me, he's like, Josh, we're in trouble. We're going to have to push off the interview. I was like, why? He's like, Rick is going to watch this hockey game, and he's not traveling during the hockey game to come do your stupid show. And I was like, you know what? I totally understand it. If that's not Canada First, then I don't know what it is.
We said that's the best reason. Because we were sitting just down there with our jerseys on going, yep, that makes sense.
Well, we agree with this. We support that message.
I'm not going to be on a plane on Canada-US hockey.
Yeah, amen to that. And but then the question then comes to is because we visited Ottawa on a couple different occasions. We sense it. We feel as soon as we get there, it's like this.
It's a different world.
Bubble. Holy jumping, it's wild down here. How do you kind of keep grounded with your constituents here and as well trying to kind of communicate that message in Ottawa?
You know what? It's hard. It's hard. I'm not looking for sympathy because I volunteered for this job. We all did, right? So, but federally, unlike provincially, federally, I have to be in Ottawa 9 months a year. I made 126 flights last year. So and it's a minority government. So I'm there Monday to Friday, fly home Friday night, have a day in the riding on Saturday, fly back on Sunday night. That's the life. So, and the day in the riding helps. Mm-hmm. So, I go to the Caledonia Fire Hall breakfast tonight. I don't eat the breakfast. They make great food, by the way, at the Caledonia Fire. I serve.
Yeah, there it is.
I serve people.
Okay.
And I talk to people.
Yeah.
You almost got yourself in trouble there.
No. The Caledonia Fire Hall breakfast is amazing.
Let's go.
But you gotta. I serve. People come in and I meet with them occasionally in the constituency office. When the house is prorogued like this, or when we're on the 2 month where the summer, I'm constantly in the riding. But the other thing that's amazing, I read my emails. I get hundreds of emails, both to my general account, my personal account, text, social media. So I respond to emails personally, and people go like, first of all, you responded like in 10 minutes. Now I can't always respond in 10 minutes, but rarely, because in Ottawa you're working 18 hours a day. But you actually responded to me. And I pick up the phone. I call people if they've written me or any of that kind of thing. You have to work hard to try and keep in touch. And the more issues that you get known for, I'm known in Nova Scotia on the fisheries issues. I'm now known in the technology industry because of the stuff I've done. I've been in the privacy industry with lawyers and all of these guys that work on privacy law, businesses. They start phoning you, right? And so I get fishermen calling me. I get some fisherman I've never met from northern New Brunswick sends me a message on Facebook, said, hey, Rick, I got a question about this. I go, okay, well, send me your phone number. And I phone them. And I can't believe I'm calling. He's not even my constituent, but that's okay because those issues are important. And so I'll phone them and talk to them and hear from what they have to say. As you can see, I can talk a lot, but you have to listen, right? I've never been a commercial fisherman, but the commercial fishermen, I'll keep writing Pierre and stuff saying, please make Rick the fisheries minister. And the reason is because I talk to them, I listen to them, I find out what their concerns are, what their daily life is like. I go out on the lobster boats in January, fishing on the lobster boats, because we don't sit in January, and learn about it, right? You want to do this job, you got to really want to learn about people's lives individually. You got to care about them, but you also have to be curious, right? But not everybody does it, and there's no uniqueness to any particular party or individual on doing that. It's easy to get trapped in Ottawa, and you do lose track. Like I phone people from Ottawa at night. Some fisherman calls me and said, and I go like, I really appreciate that you reached out to me because when you're in Ottawa, you worry that you lose
Right.
Yeah.
the connection to your community, your riding, or to the people and the issues that you care about. You know, one of the reasons I personally believe that Pierre has such a good understanding of what most people are going through. I said he did 600 events last year, and he speaks at those events. But what Pierre does at those events, if you haven't been to them, what he does at those events is he stands there and people line up, and he'll line up for hours with people taking pictures. But he talks to each person. He looks them in the eye. It's not just about the picture. Hey, get out of the way. Picture, get out of the way. It's okay. And look, I've been involved in my party for 40 years. The party activists are not the vast majority of the people I see at these events. These are ordinary folks that come out because they connect with Pierre's message, and then they get a few minutes to talk to him about it. And unless you're doing that, that's how he keeps in touch, right? Mm-hmm. Like, he probably knows better than almost anybody in Parliament what everybody is thinking. When you're holding 600 events and you're in a factory here in Halifax, and you're meeting with 50 people here in Cape Breton, or you're doing a 2,000 person rally and you stand there for 2 hours afterwards with 2,000 people lining up to have their picture with you, everybody shares with you their concerns. And so I really believe that's how he's got to be so well connected across the country. Like, he does this everywhere. And because he does it everywhere, he has a real sense, province by province, community by community, what people care about. That's why he said in his first caucus meeting as leader, we're going to talk about the cost of living, because over the leadership, that's all I heard from everybody.
But one thing, because you said about how Cody Blois, friend of yours and everything. And I think about the fact that, like,
business friend.
Right.
We're not drinking buddies.
Yeah.
Gotta clarify that.
I didn't watch the hockey game.
Yeah. Fair enough. But
I wouldn't mind to shoot some pucks at him, though.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, I have family and friends in the Valley, and they're really disappointed with him because he's not representing the views of those people in the Valley. And so what happens when you have a leader who is completely contrary to the views of those MPs in those areas? And do you think that the Conservative Party will actually allow MPs to kind of voice concerns, even when it's against maybe the direction of not saying that the leader will accept that, but that will actually let them at least voice it? Because in the Liberal Party, they're being completely told to shut up, which is what we watched in Parliament happen with him.
And it's true. So I'm going to share a secret with you.
You love it.
First of all, this is a team sport. I'm a Conservative member of Parliament because I'm a Conservative. Mm-hmm. So I have a philosophical belief. So my view on an issue existing and how you respond to that comes from a Conservative perspective. It doesn't come from a Liberal or NDP perspective. So people shouldn't be surprised that I advocate for a Conservative solution. Right. Now, it may look like the party position. In the Liberal Party, and Liberal MPs, some of them here in Nova Scotia, I won't name them, have told me what that process is. If they want to speak in a caucus meeting, they have to write their caucus chair a week before, tell them what the subject's about, and then will maybe be allowed to speak in caucus. But let me tell you how it works in our caucus. In our caucus, we have a system. So I'm the industry critic. So if any motion, private members bill, government bill, or policy that I want to do is going to come forward to Parliament, I put out a notice to all of our caucus members. I say, on Tuesday at 11 o'clock, we're having a meeting. You can come in person, you can Zoom in, and we're going to be discussing the privacy bill. Mm-hmm. And so I will make a presentation as the responsible critic to my fellow colleagues, and they will debate it. And they won't necessarily always agree with everything. They'll modify it. And it's my job then to take it on Monday night to our shadow cabinet. We have shadow cabinet committees. So industry goes to the economic shadow cabinet. We have shadow cabinet economic policy, one on social policy and one on defense, national security, foreign policy. And I take it to economic policy, and it's my obligation not to present what I think, but by what the caucus members said. Then that committee can change it again, And then the next morning, Tuesday morning, it goes to something called P&P, which they have in government, priorities and planning. But for us, it's our leadership team. Pierre chairs that. So it's our whip, our house leader, the chairs of those committees. And I go and present to the leadership team what comes out of that cabinet committee meeting. And then, of course, they can change it. They say, okay, MPs, shadow cabinet, P&P, it all could get changed again.
Yeah.
Pierre might give his opinion, but that's not all of it. Wednesday morning is when caucus happens. So then I have to get up and present the caucus, all caucus, what comes out of that leadership thing. And then everybody in caucus can get up to the microphone, debate it, give their opinion. And we all sit in caucus. We have a red and a green card, and we hold the votes on everything. So everyone gets their say. You don't always get your way, but you get your say. So there are no limits. We don't have to apply to speak to anything. You just speak in caucus on anything that you want to speak on, whenever you want to speak on the agenda. So if it's the leadership team's report, what's going on in the House, or whether it's a presentation I might make on government legislation or a policy idea, or it's open mic. We have an open mic where you can get up and say anything you want and anything you want. You can get up and do all that, but it's a team. And you get your say, and you get your say all of those various stages. And at the end of the day, we come out and say, you don't win them all, you win some of them, and we're part of the team. If you're part of the team, then you support that. So that's a long answer, but I wanted you to understand that MPs in our Conservative caucus get their say from their riding, from their region, from their experience on every single issue you see before Parliament. Doesn't mean they get everything they want. But once you go out like a team. If the coach in the Canada hockey team says this is the way we're going to do the penalty kill, and you don't agree, you don't go on the ice and skate somewhere else. You either participate in that or you get off the team.
Right. That's very fair. And that was amazing. That was a great interview, Rick. That was fantastic. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Anytime.
Yeah, anytime? I'd love to see it. It's 4 a.m. No, I'm just kidding.
4 a.m. I'll do the 4 a.m.
Yeah, there you go. No, I really appreciate it, Rick. It means a lot. You've really kind of helped a lot of our listeners understand kind of how the inner workings of the party work, and as well as kind of what their viewpoints are moving forward on some of these bigger issues. So thank you so much. It means the world, and have yourselves a good one.
You too. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Getting drunk from 7